So, Warhammer is one of possibly, if not the most well-known tabletop games, besides of course D&D. And yes, I know D&D is a tabletop RPG, but it's still a tabletop game, so you get the point. Nowadays, Warhammer is what people think of when someone says tabletop war games. For years, Warhammer has always reigned supreme in the sphere of tabletop war games because there's honestly no other game like it. But while some people think Warhammer is great, others not so much. Especially with how GW's been acting lately. Yes, the possibilities are endless when it comes to building and painting your armies, but us veteran Warhammers... Okay, what the f do we call ourselves as Warhammer fans besides plastic crack addicts? Names aside, we all know the ins and outs of what makes Warhammer both good and bad. And we're usually the ones newer or interested hobbyists look to for advice. But since a lot of my past successful videos dealt with helping people interested in Warhammer, as a niche internet micro-celebrity, I figured it's time to throw my hat into the ring and ask the question, is it really worth getting into Warhammer? So let's talk about it. But welcome back everyone, it's me the Warhammer complainy guy, Revan/Handy, destroyer of wallets, and maker of terrible financial decisions. So before all the GW, Sims, and 3D printing vegans start typing before they think in the comments, thanks for the engagement by the way, asking if Warhammer is really worth getting into is an important question to ask because that's a question we all ask ourselves before we start any new hobby. We think about things like how much does it cost? Is it worth my time? Do I have space for all of this? Is there a place where I can play the game? Or how pissed is my family or significant other gonna be if I buy this $2,000 model train? So let's start with the most obvious one, cost. So I've covered the cost of Warhammer in multiple videos, but the most common theme that any Warhammer veteran will tell anyone is that Warhammer is really f***ing expensive. Cost will always be the first barrier to any hobby, and yes, I know the 3D printing bros are salivating at the mouth about to type just to get a 3D printer, but for once in your life, shut up and listen. I'll get to 3D printing in a minute. You see, there are multiple games that fall under GW's umbrella, but the most common one people will usually want to get into is Warhammer 40k. For 40k, the average cost of one model kit, which can have anywhere from 3 to 10 models depending on the faction, is $50 to $65. And for those of you that know nothing about Warhammer, you would probably think,
hey, that's pretty good.
And then you realize this is just one unit of many you might need if you want a 2,000 point army. Yeah, did I forget to mention that you need to buy a lot of these boxes at similar prices just to get an army?
I'm deeply sorry.
Also, yes, I know that there are 500 and 1000 point games, but 2000 is the standard. So if you want a 2000 point army, depending on the faction, you should honestly be prepared to shell out at least $500 to upwards of $1,000 for an army, unless you're patient and only buy combo boxes. But this isn't even including the cost of hobby supplies like glues, brushes, and paint. So expect to spend a lot of money on this hobby. Oh, and if you want to play, you need to buy a rulebook that's outdated the moment it releases, but I'll explain more about that later. But a 2000 point army is usually the end goal. If you want to just paint and collect minis, it's vastly cheaper to some degree. You don't need to have a 2000 point army from the get-go because you might not even like this hobby. If you want to see ways to be a cheapskate, you can check out this video right here. There's also Kill Team, which is vastly cheaper than 40k since one box costs $65, and for some reason, two of them are $80.
Huh?
There's also 3D printing, and if you want to go that route, that's fine since GW is making it an obligation at this point, but you have to remember from the perspective of someone that's starting, what's more reasonable? $40 to $65 for a few miniatures, or a $300 plus printer that has a whole bunch of quirks that come with it, along with the hazards if it's a resin printer. And frankly, not knowing if the miniature wargaming hobby is even for them. So as it stands right now, probably the worst aspect that makes Warhammer not really worth it is the cost. Because here are some of the things I could buy if I spent the same amount of money as a 2000 point army. But if you were to look past the ridiculous prices, which is honestly really hard to ignore, but if you're looking for variety, Warhammer also has that in spades, and not just in 40k. Now there are tons, and I mean tons of really cool models you can choose from, and those models belong to what are called factions, and there's also a lot of factions you can choose from. There's pretty much an army for everyone, like the army that keeps the lights on, the Space Marines, edgier Space Marines, giant robots, nuns with guns, golden bananas, mushroom men, rock and stone, knife ears, and the most popular army for women, Bug. And there are many more armies than this, you just gotta do some research. This plethora of variety is one of the main reasons I think Warhammer is just so appealing to a lot of people, because you're bound to find one army or model you vibe with. For instance, if we ignore the unpainted Warlord Titan, the armies that drew me into Warhammer were the Dark Angels and Imperial Knights. Dark Angels because I like the medieval knight theme with their armor, which I found out most if not all the cool Dark Angels models are Horus Heresy. I liked Imperial Knights because, I mean, come on, it's giant robots, what's not to like? And then later on I got Custodes because my Telemon Dreadnought needed some friends. This also relates to the most important rule of Warhammer, which is the rule of cool. The rule of cool is pretty much just buy whatever you think looks cool, regardless of rules, viability, or if it's even legal in game. This is how I ended up with 4+ armies, and yes, I'm counting the armies that can be used in both 40k and 30k. But you always want to buy what you think looks cool, because then you'll hopefully have more motivation to paint it. This is probably one of the most important tips, since I would rather collect what I think looks cool than what's meta or even what would work in my army, because frankly, I just like assembling and painting miniatures. But unfortunately, over the past few years, GW's kind of been killing that cool factor that we all know and love, with either their bland, uninspired designs that they just copy and paste, retiring beloved minis, whatever the this is, or just throwing brand new plastic miniatures into Legends that we just bought. So in terms of variety, it's pretty good, but at the same time, they're also killing off variety. But if you can ignore GW's recent decisions, which is honestly really hard to do, the variety of miniatures you can paint is honestly a good enough reason to get into Warhammer if painting and collecting miniatures is more your thing. Now, the next question you need to ask if getting into Warhammer is worth it is it worth my time? And speaking of time, it's audience interaction time. So if you're enjoying the video so far, you can do your part by doing all that good YouTube stuff like subscribing to the channel, along with liking the video and leaving a comment for the almighty YouTube algorithm. Like if you were talking to someone who's interested, how would you rationalize why Warhammer is worth getting into, and vice versa, why it's not worth getting into, since putting both sides under scrutiny is healthier than just saying yes. Also, at any point in the video, if I forget to mention something in any of my talking points that you think is important, mention that in the comments too. And since I want this video to be ready on time...
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Warhammer is a huge, and I mean a really huge time sink, on top of it also being a huge money sink. A lot of our time in Warhammer won't be playing. It's mostly going to consist of building and painting your miniatures over the next few years, since you bought way more than you honestly should have in a short period of time. But is it worth my time is a question we all ask ourselves daily, because our time on Spaceship Earth is finite. Do I want to spend over 100 hours building and painting this army, or do I want to spend time with my family? Do I want to spend a few hours watching this $2,000 model? Or should I respond to my hypothetical girlfriend's text messages since she's getting angry that I would rather spend time cleaning and building my $2,000 model than spending time with her? And I could give many more examples, but like my time, your time is also valuable. And thanks for watching this video, by the way. So if you're enjoying your hobbies, the time spent on it should be an afterthought because it's something you enjoy. I've probably spent hundreds of hours on Warhammer alone on top of model trains, which you can see in the channel's livestream tab, and for the most part, I've enjoyed the time I've spent building and painting my collection, albeit a bit slow. But time is important in this hobby because your time is also money in a sense. How much money I spent on this miniature shouldn't outweigh the time I spent enjoying the journey of completing the miniature, because while yes, the initial purchase hurts, in the end, it's all about the journey and the time spent getting to the end of that journey. Speaking of time, you know what else takes time? Playing the game itself. So the game itself is a mixed bag for everyone, but we all usually agree that GW makes a lot, and I mean a lot, of questionable balance changes. Like how in the first 6 months or so of 10th edition, it was a show because they refused to nerf the knife-eared bastards, and instead hit all the armies that countered them like Knights, Custodes, Imperial Guard, and Gene Stealer cults in the first 2 balanced data slates. And you can guess how the following months went. Eldar were raffle stomping everything with impunity because they shot out devastating wounds like it was candy. And GW did nothing about it until almost every single tournament was like the Eldar population before the creation of the Eye of Terror. Then there's the sorry state the Dark Angels have been in since the start of 10th edition, where instead of using the Dark Angels Codex detachments, we just used the Gladius detachment because it was leagues better than the in this pretty doorstopper right here. That is until Wrath of the Rock, which is just Diet 9th edition Codex. And even before Wrath of the Rock, they had to force non-codex compliant chapters to not use the Gladius detachment by changing the wording, and even then we still said, "Fuck it! Do it live!" This entire edition and now Diet 40k or Horus Heresy 3.0 are just riddled with questionable design and balance changes that both dumb down the game and make it nearly impossible for some armies to function properly even after they get their codex. Because remember when I said earlier that the codexes are outdated the moment they're released? Well, that's because by the time the codexes were printed months before release, they're already changing what's in it, or even just shitting out a new detachment because the ones in the codex are trash. So then you just spent $60 on a book with pretty pictures and 10 to 15 pages of data sheets that'll also get changed. And don't even get me started on these stupid data cards. But this then brings us to the final subject, if it's even worth getting into Warhammer right now, which is that GW, the company itself, are a bunch of greedy bastards. The video that started my channel's explosive growth last year was me talking about how GW's price increases were getting out of hand and it was only getting worse. So remember earlier when I said I would talk about legends? Well, this is that talk. In Warhammer, we have something called legends. Legends is where GW takes old beloved models and makes them no longer usable in Store Rogue Trader tournaments or major tournaments, but you can still use them in casual games, unless your opponent is a killjoy of course. They do however give these models rules for an edition or two and then they stop, either because the models are out of production or belong to a different game system, or they just replaced it with a newer model that fills out that same niche. And you would think they would plan ahead and have replacements ready to go for the armies that now have massive holes in certain niches, right? What they actually did was give everyone the middle finger after squeezing as much money as possible out of them a few months earlier. This then caused a giant warp storm of its own because it pissed off not only the veteran players, but the newer players as well, since a lot of people just bought those minis and now they have an expensive paperweight if they don't play Horus Heresy. And a lot of Chaos armies got royally f***ed over by this because they didn't have any replacement models. And then we have repackaging. You see this knight right here? I got it for $130 back in 2020, and it came with enough parts for 7 knight variants if you magnetized everything. Well, now it's $200 and there's 2 separate boxes, and if I'm reading this correctly, both boxes have every other variant, but if you want Canis Rex or the Knight Defender, you have to buy both boxes, which is just a lame excuse to get you to buy what is essentially a glorified upgrade sprue that should have all been in one box. Also, did I mention this company is more important to the UK's economy than its own fishing industry? Because its profit margins are way higher than pretty much any major company you could think of, which is honestly wild. And then they have the gall to increase the prices due to inflation or tariffs. We're pretty much paying for the name brand at this point, like Gucci or Cartier. Another thing is that it feels like they hate their fans and sick their lawyers at anyone that so much as has the word Warhammer or Space Marine in the name of something that they see as a threat to their bottom line. They even recently got an Etsy store shut down because they said these diamond checker pattern stencils infringe on their copyright. I'm 99.9% sure you don't own the copyright to diamond checker marks, GW. I'm honestly just waiting for them to eventually f up so badly by going after the lore and painting channels with the stupidest reasoning of only we can make that content on our lame excuse of a streaming platform, which is also why fan animations are rarer than a f***ing Concord fan. At this point, GW are just asking everyone to pirate their shit because of how morally bankrupt they are. There's a reason Star Wars was so successful under George Lucas, because he knew the #1 rule, which was to not piss off the fans. I guess Disney didn't get that memo. But if GW treating their fans like piggy banks turns you off from Warhammer, I honestly don't blame you. Just the company shooting itself in the foot every other week is making Warhammer not as appealing as it used to be. So in conclusion, in my honest opinion, and I'm emphasizing this is my opinion, you all have brains, hopefully, so you can all draw your own conclusions. But as it is now, Warhammer is over the line of it's not worth getting into right now. With the ever increasing cost due to GW's greed, their increasing hostility towards fans, the stagnation of 40k's mini designs, horrible balance choices, canning beloved miniatures, and many other things, I honestly have a hard time recommending Warhammer to people that are interested. But I try my best to highlight the positives, because while I do think Warhammer is going down the shitter to some extent, who am I to tell you how you want to spend your money or time? I'm just a guy on the internet. This hobby isn't for everyone, but it's a fun hobby. I've made some great friends along the way and hope to eventually make more. Warhammer is special because, for all of its faults, it's still fun. And if GW were to suddenly go under, I think Warhammer itself would be fine, because the fans in the end are what keeps the game going, not the company. So the real answer of is it worth getting into Warhammer is yes. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, and a huge thank you to the GIGAist of the Chads, the channel members and Twitch subscribers. So if you too want to be a Giga Chad and help fund these stupid adventures, consider becoming a member of either for access to the member section of the Discord and other things. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, but I have to go make more terrible financial decisions, so I'll see you all in the next video, and remember, when you play Warhammer, being poor is a choice.